And on top of that, I think it would be maybe pertinent as well for those people who, commercial property is totally new to them and perhaps come from your background, Arshad, of buy-to-lets, residential, HMOs, whatever that might be, is also the real differences between residential and commercial. So obviously in residential, the tenant tends to have a lot more of the protection. We may have noticed that. The landlord, we hear all about, don't we, anti-landlord taxes, and there's an awful lot. So, you really have to be, tenant focused. Obviously, you want to provide a really great service, but you can be really messed around by a tenant, because tenants can be bad tenants. Of course, I'm sure there are the odd bad landlord as well. Whereas in the commercial world, it's completely turned on its head, isn't it? So you have these kind of FRI. So you have an agreement, which is a fully repair and insuring agreement, where they look after everything, basically. They obviously insure it, they repair it, all of those kind of things. Can you see any other things for you that has been a drastic difference, in going down this commercial route, as far as maybe day-to-day, just the calmness of the business? Because I would imagine a buy-to-let business, although you've got people maybe staying for a long time, can have some issues. Maybe a fence that's blown over. Maybe this has happened, that has happened. Whereas in a commercial, it's a bit more of a restful business.
Yeah, so you make some fantastic points there, Emma. I mean, one of the things that I kind of share from my personal experience is, up in Scotland, we've got a rent cap of 3% or 6% if you can prove financial difficulty. So you can imagine how, as the interest rates and mortgages, you're having to fund your own portfolio because of or squeeze on the cash flow. So once again, whereas on the commercial side, you've got the increases written into the leases before you've even signed on the dotted line, and that's protected as well. Whereas on the residential side, you're at the whims of what the government and the legislation dictates. Also, we have an eviction ban at the moment as well, and that makes it difficult. Even if you've got a problem tenant and there's a reason, you've got legitimate reasons that you want control of your property back. So there's just a lot more moving parts. But I think the biggest difference, and this is what Paul alluded to at the beginning of this conversation, I was just playing at a much smaller scale, of what I could do and what I could achieve, because I was bringing in a couple of £100 from a property each month. I thought I was doing okay, and I thought that'd be enough. But really, when you compare it with the deals that I'm doing now, with Paul as my business consultant, we're talking about, it took me 5 or 6 years to build a portfolio of 7 figures. Of 75% of that belongs to the bank, and a few people might share that. Whereas now we're going to have a property that's where we've added £600,000 of profit, but on top we've got the customer value, and it's a business. So can you see how they're just playing at that smaller scale?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, just to go back and reiterate what you were saying then. So with regards to tenants, a buy-to-let tenant, if what you were saying is if something happens to your buy-to-let tenant and you want them to your property and you need them to move out for whatever reason, is pretty much could be it could be very, very challenging to get them out. It can take a long time. With your commercial tenant, you have contracts in place, you have agreements. If they don't pay the rent, you change the locks and they can't come in. It's very, very specific. So there are so many incredible sort of benefits. And then on top of that, if you happen to have your own business, you could always rent out a bit of your own business as well, for your own business in there. So there's just a huge amount of massive benefits to do that. So yeah, so let's now talk about how you found it, how this came about. What where was it? Just on the open market?
It's not necessarily and the people that you're having the conversations with and who you're working with. So before in the past, you know, I don't want to say foraging in the bin, so to speak, for the next buy to let, but you get what I mean. You're kind of down and dirty and having to kind of umpteen property visits and whatnot. Whereas commercial property, by the time you see it in the market, it's already too late. So you really need to have the connections and know and to be working with the right people in order to get the introductions so that you can get in first, so to speak. So these kind of deals, you know, even if an agent had it, they're unlikely to bring it to the likes of you and me. It's having those back connections and having the right people, working with the right people. That's how you get these kind of deals.
So this is how it happened, was it? It was over a period of time building up, relationships with commercial agents and things like that?
Well, not only commercial agents, but also, it's working with the likes of people like Paul. So he could kind of guide me and nudge me along the way, as well as to what would be sort of fruitful places to have conversations with and how to kind of steer those, because he's done multiple deals at multi-million pounds. So things like this are like a walk in the park for someone like him to kind of help guide me.
So what would you advise on that, Paul, as far as, you know, finding people to help you out? And also, is there kind of like, you're quite specific. Presumably you need to be really clear. It's almost like a template. This is what I'm looking for. Is that how you go about it?
I think that, you know, so this particular deal kind of went through a journey, as most deals do, but this one originally went to administrators and was bought from administrators. And that's not going through agents. There was never an agent involved in this deal at all, and it was never on the market. It was a deal done from one person to another. In fact, with this particular deal, Arshad, there wasn't even anybody else in the picture, was there? There wasn't. You weren't competing. There was no kind of competing with other buyers. You were. You had the field open to yourself. Oh, sorry, we seem to have lost Arshad. So a lot of it is about, as Arshad said, and I like to think I helped him a little bit with this, but he did the hard work. But a lot of it's about cultivating the right relationships with the right people. You know, we talk a lot, particularly in property and in business, about networking, right? But it's where you network, who you network with, and how much time you spend with individuals. In this case, Arshad spent quite a lot of time with the individuals concerned to make sure that he wasn't the head at the head of the pack. He was the pack. And I spent a lifetime in property buying things that weren't for sale for amounts of money that people didn't want to take, right? And people always say, well,
I want to be writing these down, all these little snippets that he comes out with.
Well, how do you do that, right? And it's about, it's an old cliche, but it's true if you do it well. It's about relationship building.
Yeah, absolutely. But for you, Paul, is it really, the model that you are looking for is literally like you spoke about earlier? It's looking for commercial properties where there clearly are what let's call them B type companies in a prime location, and that's where you see that opportunity.
Well, for Arshad, I mean, my business is got its own kind of there's 4 business models inside of my business, but let's talk about Arshad's business, which I think is much more interesting at the moment in this interview. Arshad has 3 separate business models, all within inside the one business. And that's very important. So he has an aspect of his business that's about bringing investors, bringing, partners, business partners in, and giving them a really good return on their money. I think in this one, Arshad, you kind of, or in your business generally, you're looking at returns for people who have come somewhere between 10 and 30% at the moment, aren't you?
Yes. So based on, with the buy-to-lets, it was a lot lower, sort of kind of just under 10, whereas now we've moved on to the bigger projects. So there's a bit more risk involved, but, where isn't there risk? But the returns kind of are between 10 to 30% because we're doing projects that can pay for those kind of returns, if you get what I mean. Whereas in the past, I couldn't pay those returns because there wasn't enough in them to pay those kind of.
Yeah, and definitely. And that's good to hear that, you know, you talk about that, these large returns in that commercial space that is more likely to have a definite road, a definite path. You can see it clearly. Whereas somebody was telling me the other day that they had, you know, they were being offered 16% for a bungalow conversion. And, you know, there was just alarm bells that there just is not going to be enough money in that to be able to support returning an investor of that. So it's really key that every person in a chain, in a business, needs to understand what they're going into as well. So it's, you know, it's really key that you, not only are people going to be able to invest confidently in you, because one, you can explain it, you can, you know, take them through the deal. You've got somebody supporting you in Paul, and they can actually see the facts and figures. Whereas, you know, it's quite scary when some people throw themselves into something. It all might sound quite nice. Oh, I'm getting massive amount of return for your money. But if there's no money for you to get from that deal, it's not going to happen, is it? So, yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So that's the one arm. You've got your investors. Then you said there was 3, Paul.
And then he's got his commercial aspect, which lots of people still, I mean, more and more people are getting into commercial now. And we're talking about, I see in the chat, we're talking about things like SaaSes. And obviously, you know, because of Arshad's background, he currently works for kind of one of the biggest pension companies in the world. And as an actuary, and he understands the whole pension world and the SaaS world. And that's another aspect to it, is this idea that he's beginning to understand commercial, but he's always understood, because of his day job, if you like, the role that pensions can have in commercial that they can't have in residential, or shouldn't have in residential. And then the third and final aspect of it is that he has the business model of an exit plan, because many people get into property with an entrance door, but there's no exit door. Whereas every time that Arshad is building one of these models, he is seeing that he won't own that forever. You know, this idea that will go to his children and his grandchildren that people quite often have in property. Arshad sees it much more as a business that he will be in for a number of years, add value to that business, and then sell it. And that's one of the huge advantages about commercial property, is if you think about having a portfolio of 10 residential properties with, you know, 10 tenants in them, if you said that those properties were worth £10 million, £1 million each, the actual properties themselves. Oh, we seem to have then if you went to sell them in the open market, it's very unlikely anybody would want to pay you more than the market value of the property. In fact, if you had a sitting tenant, they might want to pay you less than the market value of the property. Whereas commercial is exactly opposite than that. You have a good commercial property with a good quality tenant in it, with a long FRI lease. Not only do you get the value of the property, but you get the value of the business. So you might not get that if you've got one commercial property, but you have 10 commercial properties, you then have a business. And people will say, right, okay, well, those 10 properties, the bricks and mortar are worth £10 million, because that's the kind of average that Arshad's now working on, £1 million of property, as opposed to a few £100,000 of property, £1 million of property. 10 properties producing, you know, £1 million a year, because this one will produce just over £100,000 per annum in rent. You don't ask somebody for 10 million, you ask somebody for 20 million because they're buying a business.